My school tried to force me to be the rich kid's trophy date. I walked out. You know that feeling when you realize your life has turned into some twisted reality show you never auditioned for? Yeah, that was my junior year at Westmont Academy. Let me paint you a picture of this place. Westmont isn't just any high school, it's where old money sends their kids to network before they inherit the family fortune. If your parents aren't pulling up in a Mercedes at minimum, if your last name isn't on a building somewhere, if you've never casually mentioned our place in the Hamptons in conversation, you're basically a ghost floating through these halls. The social hierarchy here isn't just strict, it's carved in marble and probably insured for millions. Every year, prom at Westmont is less of a dance and more of a competitive sport. I'm talking months of planning pre-prom parties that cost more than most weddings, and enough judgment to fill a courtroom. Your date, your dress, your arrival vehicle, everything gets scrutinized like you're walking the Met Gala red carpet. It's exhausting just watching it unfold. This year, though? This year things got weird in a way I never saw coming. About a month before prom, I started picking up on these strange whispers in the hallways. At first, it was just fragments, hushed conversations that would stop the second I got too close, knowing looks exchanged between the popular crowd. Then someone mentioned something called the prom draft, and I honestly thought it was some kind of joke. Like, surely that couldn't be real, right? Wrong. So incredibly wrong. Turns out, the most popular guys at school, the ones whose family names are literally engraved on plaques in the main building, had created this elaborate system where they were drafting girls to take to prom. Like fantasy football, except instead of picking quarterbacks and running backs, they were picking us. Actual human girls. As if we were trading cards they could collect and show off. The audacity of it should have been shocking, but honestly, at Westmont I wasn't even that surprised. I figured this whole mess had nothing to do with me. I wasn't part of their world, didn't want to be either. I kept my head down, focused on my classes, hung out with my actual friends who didn't measure their worth in trust fund zeros. The popular crowd and I existed in completely different orbits, and I was perfectly fine with that arrangement. Then I found out I'd been drafted. Not just drafted, I was a first-round pick. And not just by anyone. By Jason Winters himself. If you went to Westmont, you knew exactly who Jason was. Everyone did. His family was the kind of wealthy that made other rich people feel poor. Private jets, multiple vacation homes, cars that cost more than most people's houses, a mansion that could probably house a small village. But more than the money, the Winters family had something even more valuable at Westmont: power. They donated so much money to the school that the administration basically treated them like royalty. Jason's parents could make or break careers with a single phone call. Teachers knew it. The principal knew it. Hell, even the janitors knew it. And because of that, Jason walked through these halls like he owned them, which, technically, his family kind of did. He was exactly the type of guy you'd expect, entitled, arrogant, and completely convinced that his bank account made him better than everyone else. The kind of person who'd never heard the word no in his entire life and wouldn't know what to do with it if he did. I'd watched his behavior for years and it was always the same pattern. A few weeks before this whole prom disaster, I witnessed a perfect example of how things worked in Jason's world. We were in chemistry class, and Mrs. Beckett was trying to explain molecular structures while Jason and his friends treated the back row like their personal comedy club. Snide remarks, obnoxious laughter, paper airplanes, the usual disrespect. Mrs. Beckett was normally pretty patient, but that day something snapped. "Jason, stay after class," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through his laughter. The classroom went dead silent. Jason rolled his eyes, but he didn't argue. When the bell rang, everyone filed out slowly, a few students lingering in the hallway because, let's be honest, we all wanted to see what would happen. My friend Maya grabbed my arm, whispering, "Do you think she'll actually do something this time?" We both knew the answer, but hope springs eternal, right? A few minutes later, the classroom door flew open and Jason stormed out, his face red with anger. I only caught the tail end of Mrs. Beckett's words. "Still accountable for your actions regardless of who your family is." Everyone in the hallway froze. Jason spun around, glaring at her through the doorway with this look of pure contempt. "You're going to regret speaking to me like that," he spat, literally spat toward her, before storming down the hall. For about 5 seconds I thought maybe, just maybe, there would be consequences. That someone would finally hold Jason accountable for being a complete nightmare. The next morning proved how naive that hope was. Mrs. Beckett was practically sunshine and roses toward Jason. He strutted into class with his usual swagger, smirking like yesterday never happened. The tension had evaporated overnight, replaced by this weird, uncomfortable politeness. Mrs. Beckett didn't say a word about his behavior. She just smiled tightly and went on with the lesson while Jason lounged in his seat like a king on his throne. The rumors started almost immediately. Word around school was that Jason's parents had a conversation with the administration, followed by a generous donation to Mrs. Beckett's favorite charity, which everyone knew was code for her own bank account. Nobody had proof, but nobody needed it. This was just how things worked at Westmont. That afternoon, Jason was back to his old tricks, throwing paper wads and making smart-ass comments while Mrs. Beckett pretended not to notice. She didn't even glance in his direction when he interrupted her mid-sentence. The message was clear: Jason Winters was untouchable. So when I found out he had the first pick in the prom draft, I wasn't surprised. Of course he did. He'd paid for it, literally bribed the guys running this ridiculous scheme to guarantee he got first choice. And guess who he picked? Me. Let me be very clear about something. Jason didn't pick me because he liked me. He didn't pick me because he thought we'd have fun together or because we had some great connection. Jason picked me for the same reason people buy expensive art they don't understand, because I was a status symbol. A trophy he could show off. I guess in his world I checked the right boxes. Attractive enough to make his friends jealous, but not part of his usual circle, which made me more interesting. Most of the girls in the popular crowd threw themselves at Jason, desperate for his attention and the status that came with it. I'd never done that. In class, I didn't laugh at his jokes. I didn't offer him a pencil when he needed one. I didn't acknowledge his existence unless absolutely necessary. And apparently that drove him crazy. Jason had never spoken more than 5 words to me before this draft nonsense. We existed in the same physical space but completely different social universes. I was fine with that arrangement. He apparently was not. Jason was the walking stereotype of every spoiled rich kid you've ever seen in a movie. Designer clothes that cost more than my family's monthly rent, a sports car that he drove like he was trying to compensate for something, casual mentions of private island vacations dropped into conversation like he was talking about going to the grocery store. He bragged about his family's donations to the school like he was personally doing charity work, like we should all be grateful he graced us with his presence. When word got out that I wasn't exactly thrilled about being his prom pick, Jason didn't take it well. Actually, that's putting it mildly. He completely lost his mind over it. He started acting like I owed him a prom date just because he'd chosen me in this absurd draft. Like I was property he'd purchased and now owned. He'd find ways to bump into me in the hallways, always with that smug smile plastered on his face, making comments like, "I can't wait to see you in your dress," or "We're going to look amazing together at prom." The possessiveness in his voice made my skin crawl. I tried to avoid him, but Jason made it impossible. He'd corner me after class, blocking my path with that entitled stance of his. Every time I tried to say I wasn't interested, he'd just laugh it off like I was playing hard to get, like my clear disinterest was just part of some game. To him, my refusal wasn't real, it was just an obstacle he'd eventually overcome because, in his experience, money and persistence could buy anything. He was treating me like I was already his date, like the decision had been made and my opinion on the matter was irrelevant. In his mind, I didn't have a choice. He'd picked me, therefore I belonged to him. That was just how things worked in Jason's world. But here's where this nightmare went from bad to absolutely insane. The school started getting involved. One afternoon, I got called to the principal's office. I figured it was about a college recommendation or maybe a scheduling issue, normal school administrative stuff. I was so wrong it would have been funny if it wasn't so disturbing. Principal Hudson sat me down in her office, all serious and concerned looking, and started talking about how I should strongly consider going to prom with Jason. She didn't outright say his family donates too much money for you to refuse, but she might as well have. The implication was crystal clear. Jason's family wanted him happy, and my cooperation in this prom situation was how I could help maintain that happiness. I sat there in complete disbelief. Since when was it my responsibility to ensure some spoiled rich kid had a good prom night? Since when was I obligated to be someone's accessory just because his family had deep pockets? But Principal Hudson wasn't done. She started talking about school unity and supporting our benefactors and all this coded language that basically translated to, "Do what the rich kid wants or there will be consequences." After that nightmare meeting, the pressure came from everywhere. A couple of my teachers started weighing in, making casual comments that were anything but casual. Mr. Davidson, my history teacher, mentioned in the middle of class, in front of everyone, how it would be such an honor for any girl to go to prom with Jason, given how much his family does for our school. I just sat there, frozen in my seat, feeling dozens of eyes on me. My friends tried to be supportive, but even they started suggesting I should just go with Jason to avoid the drama. "It's just one night," they kept saying. "What's the big deal? Just smile for some pictures and get through it." But it was a big deal. It was a massive deal. This wasn't about one night, it was about being treated like I didn't have autonomy over my own choices, like my wants and comfort didn't matter compared to some rich kid's expectations. The only people who weren't thrilled about Jason picking me? The girls in his usual circle. They had their designated table in the cafeteria, right in the center where everyone could see them, where they sat with perfect posture like they were constantly posing for a photo shoot. These were the girls who somehow got away with wearing custom-tailored uniforms that technically violated dress code, but never got called out for it. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, perfectly styled hair. They looked like they'd stepped out of a high-end fashion catalog. Ever since Jason drafted me, they'd been shooting daggers at me with their eyes. It started subtle, just cold stares when I walked past their table. But as prom got closer, their hostility became impossible to ignore. Every day at lunch, I'd catch them huddled together, whispering and laughing, their eyes flickering toward me every few seconds. Tessa, who seemed to be their ringleader, had this particularly cruel smirk she'd flash whenever our eyes met. The second I looked back, though, they'd all turn away and act innocent, like they hadn't just been tearing me apart. I'd sit at my table with my actual friends and feel their eyes burning into the back of my head. Sometimes I'd catch fragments of their conversations, never enough to confront them about, but enough to know exactly what they were saying. They didn't have the courage to say anything to my face, of course. That would have been too direct, too honest. Instead, they preferred this passive-aggressive campaign of looks and whispers, making sure I felt like an outsider who didn't belong in Jason's world. The irony was that I had no interest in belonging to Jason's world. But that didn't stop them from treating me like I was some kind of threat, like I'd stolen something that belonged to them. The whole situation was suffocating. The pressure, the judgment, the constant feeling of being watched and evaluated, it was wearing me down in ways I didn't know how to articulate. And through all of this, there was another layer of weirdness that had been going on long before the prom draft even started. Before any of this happened, I'd never been the kind of girl who thought much about how I looked. I wore the same uniform as everyone else at Westmont, plaid skirt, white blouse, navy blazer. Standard issue, nothing special. But somehow on me it was always a problem. Teachers who never said a word to other girls would constantly pull me aside. "Fix your blouse," one would say, looking at me like I'd deliberately altered my uniform to be provocative. But I hadn't done anything. It was literally the same shirt every other girl wore, from the same uniform supplier in the same size. Mrs. Turner, who I'd never heard comment on anyone else's appearance, stopped me in the hallway one morning and said, "Your skirt is getting a bit short, don't you think?" While looking me up and down like I was deliberately trying to break dress code. I looked down at my skirt in confusion. It was the exact same length it had been since freshman year, the same length as dozens of other girls' skirts. But somehow on me it was inappropriate. On me it was a problem that needed correcting. They made it seem like I was constantly violating dress code, like I was trying to draw attention to myself, when the reality was I was wearing the exact same thing as everyone else. I didn't try to stand out. I didn't want that kind of attention. But somehow I always got it anyway. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging or being one of those "I'm not like other girls" people, but this happened outside of school too. At parties, I'd walk in and suddenly feel a dozen pairs of eyes lock onto me. The guys would nudge each other and whisper. The girls would size me up immediately, their expressions shifting from curious to hostile in seconds. I never asked for that attention. Most of the time I just wanted to blend in, to exist without constant scrutiny. But for whatever reason, genetics, luck, I don't know, I seemed to draw attention whether I wanted it or not. That's why Jason picking me for prom was the ultimate insult to the girls in his circle. They'd been waiting, hoping, planning for their chance to be his date. They'd spent years in his orbit, laughing at his jokes, supporting his ego, doing everything they thought would make him notice them. And then he picked me, someone who'd never shown him any interest, someone who wasn't even part of their world. They hated me for it. I didn't blame them, honestly. I hated the situation too, just for completely different reasons. After weeks of relentless pressure, from Jason, from the school administration, from teachers, and even from my own parents who didn't want me causing trouble that might affect my standing at the school, I caved. I wish I could say I stood my ground and told Jason to find someone else. I wish I could say I walked into Principal Hudson's office and told her exactly where she could stick her suggestions. But I didn't. I gave in. The pressure was too much, coming from too many directions, and I was tired of fighting a battle that everyone seemed determined to make me lose. So I agreed to go to prom with Jason, hating every second of the decision but not seeing any other way out. The school held this elaborate pre-prom event that was basically a ceremony honoring the biggest donors and the students they were sending off in style. It was one of the most ridiculous displays of wealth worship I'd ever witnessed, and that's saying something at Westmont. The gym was transformed into this gaudy venue with banners, string lights, and enough flowers to stock a wedding. Round tables covered in white linens filled the space, with parents, staff, and students seated like we were at some fancy awards show. Principal Hudson stood on stage with a microphone, beaming like a game show host about to announce the grand prize winner. As the event wound down, her smile grew even wider. "And of course, we couldn't have this evening without a special thanks to the Winters family," she announced, gesturing toward Jason's parents, who sat near the front looking insufferably pleased with themselves. "Their generosity knows no bounds, and we're so grateful for everything they've done for our school." Applause erupted. People were actually giving them a standing ovation for being rich and sharing some of it. The whole thing made me nauseous. "And as you all know," Principal Hudson continued, her voice rising with fake enthusiasm, "Jason Winters will be attending prom with one of our most exceptional students." She paused for dramatic effect, and every head in the room turned toward me. I felt like I was under a spotlight, exposed and on display for everyone's entertainment. "Let's give them a round of applause." More clapping. More staring. Jason was sitting there grinning like he'd just won the lottery, basking in the attention like this was his coronation. I felt sick to my stomach, trapped in this nightmare that everyone else seemed to think was some kind of fairy tale. After the ceremony, as people were filtering out of the gym, Jason caught up to me. He was riding high on the attention, his confidence at an all-time obnoxious level. "Ready for prom?" he asked, leaning in way too close, invading my personal space like he had every right to. I tried to brush him off, to put some distance between us, but he wasn't having it. His voice dropped lower, just loud enough for me to hear but quiet enough that no one else could. "You're mine for the night," he said with this disgusting smirk. "Everyone knows it now." The way he said mine, like I was an object he'd purchased, a possession he now owned, made my skin crawl. I didn't want to think about what he meant by that, what expectations he had for prom night that went beyond just dancing and pictures. I went home that night with his words echoing in my head, feeling more trapped than ever. The school, the teachers, my own parents, everyone had pushed me into this corner. And now Jason was standing there, claiming ownership over a night I wanted absolutely no part of. Prom night finally arrived, and it was exactly as awful as I'd imagined, except somehow worse. Jason picked me up in his flashy sports car, because of course he did. Before we could even leave for the actual dance, we had to stop at his mansion for what felt like 1,000 photos. His parents were there, dressed to the nines, making sure their professional photographer captured every angle. We posed in front of their ridiculous fountain, their marble staircase, their expensive art collection. It was painfully clear that this entire night was about showing off their wealth and their perfect son with his perfect date. I smiled for the cameras because what else could I do at that point? But inside I was counting down the minutes until this nightmare would be over. When we finally arrived at prom, things went from bad to worse. Jason wouldn't let me out of his sight for more than 2 minutes. Every time I tried to talk to my friends or grab a drink, he'd physically pull me back, his hand tight on my arm, making comments like, "Remember, you're with me tonight?" Or, "Where do you think you're going?" It felt less like being someone's date and more like being someone's prisoner. I wasn't a person to him, I was an accessory, a trophy he'd won and needed to keep close so everyone could see. At one point in the night, I overheard Jason talking to his friends near the punch table. I was standing just a few feet away, but he wasn't even trying to be discreet about it. "Man, I paid good money for this," he bragged, gesturing in my direction like I was a car he'd purchased. His friends laughed, and Jason looked so proud of himself, so satisfied with his transaction. I felt like I might throw up. This whole night was a nightmare, being paraded around like property, treated like my only value was how I looked standing next to him, listening to him brag about how much I'd cost him. The girls from his usual circle were there too, clustered together in their designer dresses, watching me with undisguised hatred. They'd probably give anything to be in my position, which was the most depressing part of all. They saw this as desirable, being Jason's accessory, his trophy, his purchase date. Jason kept dragging me around the dance floor, showing me off to everyone like I was some kind of prize he'd won. "Looking good, right?" he'd say to his friends, gesturing at me. "First draft pick, man. Worth every penny." Every word made me feel smaller, less human, more like an object. During one of the slow songs, Jason pulled me close, too close, and whispered in my ear, "You know you're mine tonight, right? I own you for these few hours." Something inside me snapped. I don't remember exactly what I said. All I remember is seeing red, feeling 3 weeks' worth of anger and humiliation boil over all at once. I stepped back, right there in the middle of the dance floor with everyone watching, and I let him have it. I told him exactly what I thought of him, of his money, of his entitled attitude, of the way he treated people like possessions he could buy. I told him he was pathetic, that his wealth didn't make him important, that he was exactly the kind of person who would die alone because he'd never learned to value anyone beyond what they could do for his image. The music seemed to pause. People stopped dancing. Everyone was staring, but for the first time in weeks I didn't care. I was done with Jason, done with this night, done with pretending any of this was okay. I grabbed my purse and stormed out of the venue without looking back. I didn't want to see Jason's reaction, didn't want to give him another second of my time. I called a car service and waited outside, my hands shaking with adrenaline and relief, until my ride arrived and took me far away from that nightmare. Monday morning came and of course everyone was talking about what happened. The gossip had spread like wildfire. Jason Winters had been publicly rejected and humiliated at prom by the girl he'd drafted. Jason's parents were absolutely furious. They called the school, demanding something be done about my unacceptable behavior. They wanted me disciplined, maybe even expelled, for embarrassing their son in front of his peers. But here's the thing, I didn't care anymore. I was done playing by their rules, done letting people push me around because they had money and influence. I went straight to Principal Hudson's office and filed a formal complaint against Jason. I documented everything, the way he'd treated me like property, the inappropriate comments, the possessive behavior, the way he'd literally bragged about paying for me like I was merchandise. I didn't expect much to come from it, honestly. The Winters family had too much power, too much influence. But I needed to stand up for myself, needed to go on record saying that what happened wasn't okay, even if the administration was still trying to protect their precious donor family's reputation. What happened next surprised me. Apparently, word had spread about Jason's behavior, the real story, not just the sanitized version his parents were trying to spin. Some of the teachers who'd pressured me into going with him actually approached me to apologize. Mr. Davidson pulled me aside after class and said he felt terrible about putting that pressure on me, that he should have never suggested I owed Jason anything. Mrs. Turner, who'd always been so quick to criticize my appearance, quietly told me she admired my courage. Even Principal Hudson seemed to back off a bit, probably realizing that the optics of forcing a girl to be someone's date weren't great, regardless of how much money his family donated. As for Jason? He didn't apologize. Not once. Instead, he spent the next few weeks sulking around school like a wounded animal, complaining to anyone who would listen about how I'd ruined his prom night. He played the victim, acting like he was the wronged party in all of this, like I'd somehow betrayed him by refusing to play my role as his accessory. But here's what was really satisfying: Jason's social status started to crumble. People were finally seeing him for what he really was, an entitled, spoiled brat who thought his money could buy anything, including people. The prom draft became public knowledge, and suddenly a lot of students were questioning the whole culture at Westmont, the way we'd all normalize treating people like commodities based on their family's wealth. Jason's friends still hung around him, but there was a shift. The automatic respect, the instant agreement with whatever he said, it wasn't there anymore. People started pushing back when he made his usual arrogant comments. Girls stopped throwing themselves at him, probably realizing that being his girlfriend meant being his trophy, not his partner. His family still had their grip on the school. That kind of money doesn't lose influence overnight. But Jason himself? He wasn't as untouchable as he used to be. The armor of invincibility he'd worn for years had cracked, and everyone could see the insecure, shallow person underneath. I won't pretend everything changed overnight or that Westmont suddenly became some egalitarian paradise. The school still worshipped wealth. The administration still bent over backward for donor families. The social hierarchy still existed, probably as strong as ever. But something did shift, at least a little bit. Students started questioning things more, calling out behavior that would have been ignored before. The prom draft never happened again. It became this cautionary tale, this example of how far toxic entitlement could go if left unchecked. As for me, I learned something important that night. Sometimes the cost of going along to get along is too high. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself even when everyone around you is telling you to just smile and play your part. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to flip the board and walk away. I never regretted walking out of that prom. Not for a second. Jason Winters learned that not everything can be bought, no matter how much money your family has. And I learned that my dignity wasn't for sale at any price. Best lesson I ever learned at Westmont Academy, and it didn't come from any classroom.